My entire family laughed at my dream of being a writer, calling it a useless hobby. Tonight, at the family reunion, I slammed my best-selling novel on the table. Guess who's paying for this dinner? For years, I endured my family's mockery of my useless writing hobby. My mother once threw my notebooks in the trash, convinced she was saving me from myself. My brother, Leo, designed an app that calculated the exact amount of money I was wasting with every typed word. And my father? He loved comparing my dream to the starving artist in a freezing attic cliché. I'll never forget the night, during a dinner at my own place, when I went to the kitchen for napkins and overheard the brutal things they said, thinking I was out of earshot. I've held on to that pain for years, meticulously plotting my revenge. Tonight, I booked a table at Per Se, the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, the very same place my father was once turned away from for not meeting the dress code. The whole family is here for a special dinner. They have no idea that my useless hobby just landed me a 7-figure book deal, with translation rights sold in 23 languages, or that Netflix called this morning to confirm the film adaptation. I'm about to drop my best-selling novel right in the center of the table and deliver the line I've rehearsed 1,000 times. Guess who's paying for the meal you could never afford? But what happened next completely shattered my perfect revenge plot in a way I could never have possibly imagined. I've never told a soul, but I have a secret ritual for dealing with the rejection letters that flood my inbox from publishing houses. I blast ABBA's Dancing Queen and dance with wild abandon in nothing but my boxer shorts and socks, spinning around my tiny bedroom at the back of my parents' house in Queens. Is it ridiculous? Absolutely. But after 57 emails starting with, "We regret to inform you," you learn to develop some coping mechanisms. What's yours? Rejection number 58 arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I stared at the email, the publisher's logo, a stylized griffin from Sterling Press, glowing on my screen for nearly 10 minutes before I dared to open it. My room, or as my brother Leo affectionately calls it, the hobgoblin's hole, felt even smaller that day. Stacks of books created a precarious maze leading to my desk, where my second-hand laptop, a motivational gift from my dad, blinked its cursor on the same paragraph it had been stuck on for the past 3 hours. Dear Mr. Miller, thank you for your interest. I didn't even need to read the rest. I cranked up ABBA to full volume and launched into my ritual. During a particularly ambitious spin, I tripped over a stack of manuscripts and went down with a crash, taking my makeshift bookshelf, built from cinder blocks and planks of wood, down with me. 5 seconds later, the door creaked open. My mom stood there in her bathrobe and a green clay face mask, her expression a perfect blend of alarm and sheer exasperation. "Another one?" she asked, and there was something in her tone, that cocktail of pity mixed with a dash of "I knew it," that made me want to both laugh and cry. Instead, I just nodded, trying to pull a t-shirt on to regain some shred of dignity. "One day, they're gonna get it, Mom," I said, and for about 3.5 seconds, I actually believed it. She gave me that smile, you know, the one parents give you when, at 37, you announce you're quitting your job to become a professional street mime, and gently closed the door, not realizing she'd just taken a little piece of my resolve with her. "And you thought your family was complicated? Just wait until you meet the Miller clan and their special talent for crushing dreams with polite, well-meaning smiles. If there were an Olympic sport for subtly devastating commentary, my family would sweep the gold medals across all events." Last Sunday, during the traditional family dinner, read The Weekly Trial of Ryan Miller, my dad raised his glass of Sam Adams and declared, "By the time I was 30, I owned a house, had 2 kids, and was already up for a senior promotion." Everyone clinked glasses, their eyes darting sideways toward me, the 30-year-old son with an impressive collection of rejection letters and an equally notable credit card debt. Aunt Carol, the undisputed queen of passive aggression, waited for the perfect moment, just as I was reaching for the potato salad, to slide a newspaper clipping across the table. "Look here, Ryan, Prudential is hiring. With your English Lit degree, I'm sure you could get a spot in their corporate communications department. Think of the stability, honey." She pronounced stability, like it was a magic word that, once uttered, would make me abandon my manuscript and immediately apply for a 401k. I smiled, thanked her, and pocketed the clipping, adding it to the mental pile of 37 others she's given me over the past few months. My mother, on the other hand, possesses a unique gift for turning compliments into camouflaged insults. "My son is just so persistent," she remarked to our neighbor as I walked through the living room with a new stack of research books. He just keeps trying, even after— How many rejections is it now, dear? 50? 60? Imagine if he put that kind of persistence into something a bit more conventional. The neighbor nodded with deep sympathy, as if they were discussing the tragic case of a gambling addict. I kept walking, pretending I couldn't hear, but I filed every word away in a mental drawer labeled Future Motivation. And then there's the creator of the Reality Check, an actual app my brother Leo developed that calculates how much potential income I lose for every hour I spend writing. He spent the entire dinner showing off its latest update. It now includes a projection graph of how much my nursing home will cost, assuming I'll never have a retirement fund. "It's just a joke, man," he said, noticing my expression. "I support your dream, but someone's got to keep your feet on the ground. Do they have any idea how exhausting it is to have your feet held so firmly to the ground, when all you want, just for a second, is to fly?" They say that behind every frustrated writer is one person who believes in them unconditionally. In my case, that person had wild curly hair, tortoiseshell glasses, and a patience with a rapidly approaching expiration date. I met Chloe at a writer's workshop in the Berkshires, one of those expensive retreats that promises to unleash your creative potential in a single weekend. She was the instructor, curly hair always escaping from a messy bun, tortoiseshell glasses perpetually sliding down her nose, and a passion for Virginia Woolf that was almost a religion. While everyone else was trying to impress her with obscure references to Russian novelists, I managed to spill coffee all over my pants and then openly weep while reading the final passage of The Great Gatsby. The next day, she sent me an email with the subject line, "Anyone who cries over Gatsby deserves a drink. The rest is history." Our whole routine had morphed into the script of a Nora Ephron movie. You know, the kind Chloe swears she hates, but secretly watches every time it's on cable. Our life was a montage of late-night film screenings that inevitably spiraled into passionate literary debates, and weekend hunts through the dusty aisles of Brooklyn's second-hand bookshops, spending money we didn't have on books we had no space for. She would even pretend not to notice when I'd pause mid-conversation to scribble a piece of overheard dialogue onto any available surface. I've used napkins, utility bills, and, on one memorable occasion, her arm while she was asleep. Who says romance is dead? Last night, however, the rom-com vibe evaporated. Chloe sat on the edge of my bed with that look, the one that says something has been rehearsed in front of a mirror for weeks. "Ryan, I believe in your talent. I really do, but— And isn't it amazing how that one tiny word can detonate an entire sentence? We need a deadline. You can't just exist in this state of permanent almost. If there's no real, tangible progress in 6 months, maybe it's time to recalibrate." She said recalibrate with the exact same finality that my Aunt Carol uses when she says stability. To prove my unwavering commitment, I did something incredibly impulsive the next morning. I walked into a tattoo parlor in the East Village and asked for a quote Chloe always recites from Virginia Woolf. "I am rooted, but I flow." The artist, a guy who looked like he had more ink on his skin than a printing press, raised an eyebrow. "You sure, man? Sounds a little indecisive." "Of course," I insisted. When he was finished, I gazed proudly at my forearm, already imagining Chloe's reaction. Right up until I saw that he had tattooed, "I am rooted, but I flaw." Chloe, an English professor to her core, spent the next 10 minutes alternating between hysterical laughter and burying her face in her hands in utter despair. "That," she said, catching her breath, "is the single most perfect summary of your literary career so far." How could I possibly argue with that? You know that feeling when you suspect the universe might be conspiring against you? Well, sometimes it is. And sometimes your family is leading the charge. Finishing a manuscript delivers a very specific kind of euphoria, a blend of total exhaustion and the fleeting certainty that you've just created a masterpiece. After 5 long years of rewriting The Echo Lake, I decided to celebrate by hosting a dinner for the people who had always believed in me, or at least were very convincing actors. I bought 4 large pizzas from Sal's, the corner joint, but had them put in plain white boxes to look like they were from some artisanal spot in Brooklyn. Then I splurged on a bottle of champagne that cost nearly half my weekly paycheck. The rule is you can skimp on the food, but never on the symbolism. The tiny apartment I shared with a coworker from the call center was transformed. I shoved dirty laundry under the bed, lit candles that promised the scent of an old library. They smelled more like authentic mildew, and strategically placed a few important-looking books around to seem intellectual, but not intimidatingly so. My parents were the first to arrive. My mom carrying a store-bought pie she swore she'd baked herself. My dad complaining about finding parking. They were followed by Leo and his new fitness guru girlfriend, who seemed to be calculating the caloric content of the air she was breathing. Aunt Carol came bearing another job clipping, and finally, Chloe arrived, fashionably late and beautiful, holding a bouquet of yellow daisies, which, in the language of flowers she insisted on using, meant perseverance. It was during dessert, supermarket ice cream I'd scooped into glass bowls to make it look homemade, that I realized we were out of napkins. I offered to grab more from the kitchen, mostly thrilled for a chance to escape my Uncle Rob's lecture on how most of the famous writers died broke. As I was opening the cabinet, I heard their voices drifting in from the living room, my name caught in the middle of a sentence. Any sane person would have cleared their throat to announce their presence. Naturally, I froze, becoming a statue of pure anxiety. The poor kid. He really thinks he's going to be the next Stephen King, Uncle Rob chuckled. At least Stephen King sells, my mother added, her sigh carrying the weight of 1,000 unfulfilled expectations. I've tried everything. I even threw out one of his notebooks once, hoping he'd finally give up. Then my father's voice chimed in. He blew through his savings on that MFA in creative writing, and for what? That's when I heard the unmistakable notification chime from my brother's phone. Hey, check this out. The latest update on the reality check shows how much he could have made if he'd invested all that book and tuition money into Dogecoin back in the day. I just stood there, the napkins forgotten in my hand, each word feeling like a tiny paper cut, insignificant on its own, but devastating in its accumulation. Have you ever had one of those moments where you accidentally find out what people truly think of you? Trust me, no creative writing program can prepare you for that kind of plot twist. Ever have one of those moments where your entire world flips upside down in the span of 5 minutes? Get ready, because mine was about to do a 360-degree spin, all thanks to a single email. The week following the Great Napkin Revelation, as I dramatically dubbed the incident in my journal, was a masterclass in mutual deception. I pretended I hadn't heard a thing. They pretended to be my biggest supporters, and we all pretended the dinner party had been a smashing success. I fell back into my grueling routine. Wake up at 5 a.m., write for 2 hours, survive an 8-hour shift in the corporate hellscape known as a call center, then come home to rewrite my query letter to literary agents for the 1,000th time. Except now, every word of encouragement felt like thinly veiled pity. Every smile seemed to be hiding a smirk. My morning ritual involved checking my email with the same level of enthusiasm one has for looking at biopsy results. It's necessary, but you're never expecting good news. It was Tuesday, 6:12 a.m., with a light rain tapping against my window. I sat in my boxers in front of my laptop, nursing a mug of instant coffee so strong it could probably be classified as a hazardous material. I opened my Gmail expecting the usual. Spam, newsletters I don't remember subscribing to, a coupon for Domino's, and an email from Atlantic Crown Publishing. Wait, an email from Atlantic Crown Publishing? With the subject line, Offer of representation in publishing contract, the Echo Lake? That kind of thing doesn't happen in real life. Does it? I cleaned my glasses 3 times. I rebooted the computer twice. I seriously considered calling Gmail's tech support to ask if it was possible for hyper-realistic phishing scams to bypass the spam filter. The support agent on the other end would have gently suggested I seek therapy. Finally, with my heart pounding like it was trying to escape through my ribcage, I clicked open the email. Dear Mr. Miller, we are delighted to inform you that your manuscript, The Echo Lake, has been selected for publication with a significant advance, a $250,000 advance, and an international marketing plan. What's more, the production company Apex Plus has expressed firm interest in adapting the work for a limited series. I couldn't even finish the sentence. My entire body began to vibrate, as if I were having some kind of small, literary-induced seizure. The first call I made was to Chloe, of course. She picked up with the groggy voice of someone who had just been violently ripped from a very pleasant dream. Ryan, it's 6:20 in the I didn't let her finish. What followed couldn't technically be classified as human speech. It was more of a chaotic stream of squeals, shouts, and random words like contract, money, series, and, oh my god, die. After a full minute of this verbal explosion, she cut me off. Okay, breathe. Start over, slowly. I tried, failed miserably, and ended up just forwarding her the email. 10 seconds of dead silence on the line. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of something heavy crashing to the floor in her apartment, followed by a shriek that probably woke up her entire building. Holy hell, Ryan! Is this real? Are you sure it's real? Check the sender's domain. Call them right now. And just like that, together, we spiraled into a professional-grade panic. Have you ever felt like your entire life was just a dress rehearsal for one single moment? Yeah, me neither. Until that rainy Tuesday that changed absolutely everything. Trying to keep a secret of this magnitude is like trying to teach a cat to file your taxes. It's not just difficult, it's fundamentally unnatural. And as you've probably gathered by now, I'm not exactly the most subtle person on the planet. The choice to not immediately tell my family was born from a place deep inside me that I'd rather not analyze too closely. That petty, vindictive corner that lives in all of us. The one well-adjusted people usually keep on a leash. I looked at the signed publisher's contract on my screen, then at the reality check app update my brother had just emailed me. Special birthday update. Here's what you would have made if you'd invested the cost of printing your manuscript in Amazon stock. A new thought took shape. This moment deserves a stage. It needs a big, cinematic reveal. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about dramatic pacing. For someone who has spent his life being as transparent as saran wrap, maintaining this level of secrecy proved to be surprisingly difficult. I nearly blew my cover at least a dozen times in the week following the miracle email. During Sunday dinner, I almost dropped the contract, which I was now carrying everywhere in my backpack like a sacred relic, when I leaned over the table to grab the basket of dinner rolls and had to pretend it was just some freelance stuff from work. I bought a watch that cost more than my month's rent, and, when my dad noticed, I spun a weak story about winning the office fantasy football pool. No one really bought it, but thankfully, no one cared enough to press the issue. The worst moment was when I made a reservation at a fancy restaurant in Brooklyn to celebrate Grandma Betty's birthday, which had been 3 months prior. My boss at the call center, Mr. Henderson, a man whose life's joy seemed to be timing our bathroom breaks with a stopwatch, called me into his microscopic office on Wednesday. This was after I'd handled a particularly brutal call with a customer furious about his internet speed. "Miller," he said, using the same tone he usually reserved for announcing layoffs, "I saw your name in Publishers Weekly yesterday. Something on a list of promising new voices in literature." For a second, my heart stopped. That article wasn't supposed to come out for another month, according to the publisher's timeline. Must be a different Ryan Miller, I stammered, feeling beads of sweat strategically forming in the most visible places on my shirt. Back home, I began to meticulously craft the plan. Yes, capitalized. I would book a table at Per Se, that temple of New York fine dining. My father always grumbled was obnoxiously expensive, and where he'd famously been turned away once for not having a reservation. I would invite the whole family for a special celebration, keeping the reason a mystery. I'd wear my one decent suit, purchased for a cousin's wedding 6 years ago and now uncomfortably tight in all the places that revealed my toxic relationship with pizza. Then, at the perfect moment between the main course and dessert, I'd slide my book onto the center of the table and deliver a line that was devastatingly clever and just a little bit vengeful. I spent hours practicing in front of the mirror. Guess who's covering the bill for this meal you could never afford? Too aggressive. Remember when you all called this a useless hobby? Too whiny. So, who wants a signed copy? Way too arrogant. The mirror offered no useful feedback, only reflecting a 30-year-old man making dramatic revenge faces while wearing a faded Captain America t-shirt with a tomato sauce stain on it. Life has a funny way of keeping you humble, doesn't it? They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but nobody ever mentions that you often have to pass a strict dress code just to get into the kitchen where they make it. I walked into my first meeting at the publishing house with the same anxiety as someone about to defend their doctoral thesis. I showed up 2 hours early and paced the lobby of the skyscraper until the security guard started eyeing me with a mix of pity and suspicion. I also had 3 changes of clothes in my backpack because, well, what if I spilled coffee on myself? Given my track record, it wasn't just possible, it was probable. Have I mentioned that I'm quite possibly the clumsiest person east of the Mississippi? Chloe calls it my special gift for physical chaos. "Mr. Miller?" The receptionist smiled kindly after watching me circle the lobby for the 5th time. "They're ready for you now." I swallowed hard and walked down the hallway, my shoes suddenly feeling like they were filled with wet cement. The conference room was straight out of a movie. A massive table, floor-to-ceiling windows with a panoramic view of the city, and several well-dressed people wearing expressions of professional boredom. Eleanor Vance, the editor-in-chief, stood up to greet me. "Ryan, at last we meet the genius behind The Echo Lake." Genius? Me? The same guy who had locked his keys in his car 3 separate times last month? I instinctively glanced over my shoulder to see if she was talking to someone else. The very next day, I was whisked away for an author makeover. Apparently, my current look of unemployed adjunct professor, who might be living in his car, didn't quite fit the brand they wanted to build. The hairstylist spent a solid 10 minutes just sighing as he examined my hair before muttering something about creative challenges. When he was done, I looked like the long-lost son of a hedge fund manager and a surfer. Next came the image consultant, who had me try on clothes that cost more than 6 months of my rent. "This says serious, but approachable," he explained, handing me a navy blue blazer that looked identical to the 5 others I had just tried on. The changes, however, weren't just on the outside. I started to notice that my very posture had begun to shift. I was standing up straighter, speaking more deliberately, and actually looking people in the eye instead of focusing on that safe, neutral spot just above their eyebrows. My parents were the first to pick up on it. "You seem different," my mother commented over dinner, tilting her head like a confused puppy. My father just grunted something about how I was slouching less. But at the call center, the change was far more dramatic. When I finally handed in my letter of resignation, typed in a very professional Times New Roman size 12, I had envisioned a movie-style exit where I'd throw my headset in the air and walk out in slow motion. Instead, Mr. Henderson gave me a surprisingly firm, awkward hug and announced to the entire office, "Everyone, Miller here is leaving us to become a famous writer. I've already pre-ordered his book. We need a selfie for the company's Instagram." This was immediately followed by a round of applause and people asking me to sign post-it notes. What was this? Where's the satisfying dramatic exit when you actually earn one? You'd think that after writing an entire book, the hard part would be over. Let me tell you exactly why that assumption is hilariously, painfully wrong. The final editing process made me realize I was nowhere near as brilliant as I'd imagined. My manuscript came back from my editor, Jessica, looking like it had been mauled by a particularly ruthless high school English teacher. Red ink covered every page. "Your prose is beautiful, Ryan, but the book has some serious structural issues," she explained gently over the phone. I spent the next several weeks rewriting entire chapters, surviving on 4 hours of sleep and enough caffeine to power a small city. At one point, I was so exhausted that I sent in a draft where a character who died in Chapter 7 mysteriously reappeared in Chapter 9 to attend a 4th of July barbecue. Jessica's only note in the margin was, "A bold narrative choice, resurrection or continuity error. Discuss." The author photo shoot was quite possibly the most embarrassing experience of my entire life, and considering my history, that's a very high bar. The photographer, a woman with purple hair who seemed perpetually disappointed by the laws of physics, gave me a series of impossible directions like, "Look thoughtful, but not like you're trying to solve a math problem," and "I need to see the soul of a novelist in your eyes." I tried all the classic poses, leaning against a bookshelf, which made me look constipated, gazing pensively out a window, which made me look like a creepy neighbor, and the timeless hand on the chin, which made me look like I was trying to remember if I'd left the oven on. The winning shot? It was captured the exact moment I choked on a sip of water and sneezed simultaneously, spraying a fine mist across the studio. The photographer sighed with profound relief. "That's it. That's the most authentic you've been all day. We're using that one." How exactly is a man supposed to look dignified in a photo where he is clearly in the middle of a minor respiratory event? My first live interview was for a local morning TV show, Good Morning Queens. I arrived 3 hours early, sweating profusely through my new blazer. The image consultant's final words to me were, "Never, ever, take off the blazer in public." The host, whose smile was so bright it should have come with a seizure warning, started off gently. "So, Ryan, your novel tackles such deep themes of loss and redemption. What was your inspiration?" I had rehearsed the answer to this question 100 times, but at that crucial moment my brain hit the panic button. I took a gulp of water that went down the wrong pipe and spent the next 30 seconds violently coughing, my eyes streaming, while the host maintained her frozen smile for the camera, likely doing the mental calculus on how to save the segment, and possibly my life. The official book launch was scheduled for a small independent bookstore in Brooklyn, the very same one where I used to spend hours browsing books I couldn't afford. We were expecting 30, maybe 40 people. When I arrived, the line was snaking down the block and around the corner. "There must be another event happening tonight," I said to Chloe, who rolled her eyes in that unique way of hers that was a perfect mix of loving exasperation and pride. "It's for you, you idiot. Your book is blowing up on Book Talk." Apparently, A major literary influencer had gotten an advance copy and posted a tearful, glowing review that had gone viral. The bookstore was so packed they had to set up speakers on the sidewalk so the people outside could listen in. I signed books until my hand cramped into a permanent claw and smiled for so many selfies that my facial muscles went on strike the next day. "How does it feel to be an overnight success?" a local journalist asked. I almost laughed out loud. Overnight? If only he knew just how many nights it took to get to this one day. A year and a half later, I had the money, the recognition, and a meticulously crafted revenge plot. What could possibly go wrong? Hint: absolutely everything. An entire year went by in a frantic blur. The Echo Lake stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for 28 consecutive weeks. The reviews ranged from a refreshing new voice in American fiction to a profound meditation on identity and belonging. Personally, I still couldn't read a single page of my own book without getting the urge to rewrite every sentence. My days were now a whirlwind of book signings, speaking engagements at universities, me speaking at a university, and meetings about the streaming adaptation. I bought my own apartment in the city, a car that didn't sound like it was having an asthma attack, and clothes that didn't come from a buy one, get one free rack. But there was still one piece of unfinished business: a proper reckoning with my family. The idea for the showdown dinner had been forming slowly, like a complex character taking shape on the page. I carefully chose the most pretentious restaurant in New York City, per se. It was a place where every dish came with a biography longer than my novel, and the waiting list for a reservation was 3 months long. Luckily, or perhaps not so surprisingly, mentioning Ryan Miller, author of The Echo Lake, suddenly opened previously locked doors. I booked the private dining room for a Friday night, specifically requesting the very table my father had been turned away from years ago for not meeting the dress code. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Selecting the perfect outfit for the occasion involved 3 different fashion consultants, 6 fittings, and 1 brief existential crisis. "This green blazer says, 'I'm successful, but I'm still grounded,'" the personal stylist explained as I shifted uncomfortably in front of the mirror. "That blue one says, 'I'm a professional, take me seriously.' And the black one? The black one says, 'Welcome to the funeral for my former life.'" I went with the green, though secretly they all felt like they were saying, "I'm someone who spends way too much money on clothes." Chloe, watching this whole ordeal via FaceTime, just shook her head. "You know they're not going to notice the difference between a blazer from Men's Warehouse and a $2,000 one from Saks, right?" But I knew, and that's what mattered. And more importantly, the old me, the guy who bought his clothes from thrift store racks, would know too. I rehearsed multiple versions of the big reveal speech, and each one was worse than the last. The vengeful version, "Remember when you all laughed at my dream? Well, who's laughing now?" was dramatically crumpled up and thrown into the trash. The emotional version, "Even though you never believed in me, I always knew," made me cry in the mirror, but mostly from shame at my own self-pity. Then there was the casually indifferent version. "Oh, by the way, that useless hobby of mine is paying for this dinner," which sounded fake even to my own ears. The night before the showdown, Chloe came over to my apartment with a bottle of Cabernet and a much-needed dose of reality. "What are you actually trying to accomplish with this, Ryan?" she asked, after I'd performed my 3rd draft of the speech. I didn't answer right away. What did I want? Revenge? Recognition? Or maybe, and this was the hardest part to admit, what I truly wanted was for my family to finally see me. To really, truly see me. For the very first time. And isn't that the question that haunts all of us? Will the people who matter most ever truly see us for who we are? You ever practice a high-stakes conversation 1,000 times in your head, only to have it go completely off the rails the moment it happens? Well, multiply that by 10, and add a silently judging French waiter to the mix. The Friday of the big dinner arrived on the back of a ferocious nor'easter, a storm that seemed to perfectly underscore the evening's dramatic potential. I got to the restaurant an hour early, partly to check on the arrangements, but mostly because my nerves were too frayed to stay home. The maitre d' recognized me instantly. "Mr. Miller, your table is prepared, exactly as you requested." He led me to the private room, where a magnificent oval table was set with porcelain so fine it looked like a strong sneeze could shatter it. Crystal glasses reflected the soft light, linen napkins were folded into elegant swans, and in the center, a space was discreetly left open for the moment I would place my book. I watched my family arrive on the restaurant's security feed. Yes, I asked to monitor their arrival, and no, I'm not proud of it. My parents came first, my dad looking deeply uncomfortable in the same suit he wore to my cousin's wedding, now stretched tight across his belly. My mom in the dress she saved for special occasions, which I'm pretty sure was purchased in the late 90s. Next were Uncle Rob and Aunt Carol, who paused at the entrance to snap a picture of the restaurant's facade, no doubt for her church's Facebook group. And last was my brother, Leo, surprisingly without his fitness guru girlfriend and looking strangely agitated, constantly checking his phone. The hostess guided them to the private room, and I watched their reactions on the monitor as they took in their surroundings. The look on my father's face was priceless, a cocktail of awe and the pained discomfort of a man mentally calculating the cost of such extravagance. My mother reached out to touch a plate, her hand hovering timidly, as if her gaze alone might break it. Aunt Carol didn't waste a second. "Are we sure this is the right place?" Ryan said a family dinner, not a state dinner with the royal family. My brother, meanwhile, immediately grabbed the menu, his eyes widening as he scanned the prices. I could practically read his lips as they formed the words, $400 for an entree? An impeccably dressed waiter began pouring champagne into flutes that looked like they'd been spun from glass by woodland fairies. My dad, who considers champagne too fussy, accepted a glass with a strained smile. Uncle Rob actually tried to grab the waiter's arm to ask if they had any Bud Light. My mom held her flute like it was a live grenade. No one looked comfortable, which was exactly how I had felt for years at our family dinners. Always the odd one out, the lost dreamer. Was it petty to feel this spark of satisfaction? Probably. Was it delicious? Absolutely. Let's be honest, who hasn't dreamed of a moment of sweet revenge against their doubters? The difference is, most people just play out the scene in their heads while showering. I was about to direct it in 4D, with a live soundtrack of expensive silverware clinking against Italian porcelain. There are moments in life when you prepare to be the villain of the story, only to discover that fate has cast you in a very different role. I hid in the men's room for longer than I'd care to admit, sending a series of anxious selfies to Chloe. "You look like a spy having a panic attack," she texted back, followed by, "Just breathe. Remember, they're your family, not a parole board." So typical of her to ruin my dramatic build-up with ruthless common sense. I adjusted my green blazer for the 12th time, took one final deep breath, and walked into the private dining room with what I hoped was an air of confidence, but what probably looked more like a mannequin trying to walk. "Ryan!" My mother saw me first, jumping up to give me one of those slightly over-the-top hugs that parents reserve for children they haven't seen in 3 days. "Honey, this place is incredible. What's the special occasion?" The rest of the family just stared at me with expressions ranging from simple confusion to outright suspicion. I gave them what I hoped was an enigmatic smile and took my seat at the head of the table. A waiter materialized instantly to top off my champagne, pouring it with a reverence that did not go unnoticed by my family. I raised my glass slowly, savoring every second. "To persistence," I began, my voice steady, "and to the dreams that some people might call useless hobbies." A thick, uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My dad gave a specific kind of cough that middle-aged men use when they're emotionally cornered. Leo's brow furrowed as he tried to connect the dots. Aunt Carol stared into her glass as if hoping to find the answer in the bubbles. "What are we talking about, sweetie?" my mom asked, her smile now frozen in place. Instead of answering, I reached for my backpack. Yes, I brought a backpack to a Michelin-starred restaurant. Some things never change. And pulled out a copy of The Echo Lake, the hardcover, special edition with the gold-gilded edges. With a flick of the wrist that I had practiced no fewer than 72 times in my apartment, I sent the book sliding down the center of the table. It glided perfectly across the polished wood, knocking over my father's wineglass in a splash of red, unplanned, but a satisfyingly dramatic touch, before coming to a stop directly under the overhead chandelier. The title seemed to glow with a light of its own. And then, silence. A silence so absolute I could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. The looks on my family's faces were unreadable. It was my mother who broke the spell, her eyes already welling up with tears. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "We always knew you would do it." And right there, in that moment, my perfectly architected blueprint for revenge began to crumble. Because instead of denial, or shame, or even awkwardness, I saw something in my family's eyes that I was completely unprepared for. Pride. Pride. The absolute nerve. How dare they sabotage my meticulously planned vengeance with genuine affection? Now what? My entire devastating monologue, all those killer lines I'd practiced, suddenly felt utterly ridiculous in the face of my mother's tears and my father's trembling smile. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. This was meant to be a mic drop, in-your-face moment, not an emotional family breakthrough. My brother, completely shattering the tension, did what any millennial would do. He pulled out his phone to look up the book on Amazon. Dude, it has 8 stars from over 3,000 reviews, and, wait, it's being translated into 23 languages? Uncle Rob, recovering from the initial shock, reached for the book with a kind of reverence. You wrote this whole thing, kid? R. Ryan? It's incredibly hard to maintain a vengeful author persona when your uncle is looking at you with the proud, teary eyes of a golden retriever, you know? You know when you plan for a big, "Ha! I told you so" moment, and what you get instead is a chorus of, "We knew it all along"? Yeah, I wasn't ready for that either. I swallowed the bitter resentment I had nursed for so long and managed a smile, one that started out fake but, to my own surprise, ended up feeling real. Yeah, I wrote it. The useless hobby, remember? I saw my father flinch just slightly, which gave me a tiny, petty sliver of satisfaction. My mother was now holding the book, tracing her fingers over my author photo on the back cover as if she couldn't believe it was real. But why didn't you tell us sooner? The launch party, the interviews, we've been seeing it all in the news. Hold on. They knew? I heard you that night, I finally confessed, the words tumbling out, harsher than I'd intended. At my dinner, the one to celebrate finishing the manuscript. I went to the kitchen for napkins, and I heard every last word. About my useless hobby, about me being a lost cause, about how you, Mom, threw out one of my notebooks to see if I'd finally give up. Her face went pale. Leo stopped scrolling on his phone. My father stared intently into his empty wine glass. I even recorded some of those conversations, you know. Over the years, I have a whole audio file of the snide remarks, the little put-downs, the laughter behind my back. My mother covered her mouth, the tears now streaming freely down her face. Ryan, that notebook. I didn't throw it away to make you quit. Her voice was shaking. I threw it away because I was terrified that you never would, that you would sacrifice everything for this dream, that you'd end up. She didn't have to finish the sentence. The word hung in the air between us. A failure. Your father and I, we grew up in an era where you got a steady job and you kept it. We were so scared of seeing you get hurt, of watching you face that kind of disappointment. My father cleared his throat, a man visibly uncomfortable with this level of emotion, but determined to see it through. When I was your age, I wanted to be a musician, he said quietly. Traded my sheet music for a paycheck. It felt like a punch to the gut. You? A musician? In 30 years, I had never once heard my father even hum in the shower. He nodded, a sad smile playing on his lips. Bass player. Had a whole band. But then your mother got pregnant with Leo and, well, dreams don't pay the mortgage, son. I stared at him as if I was seeing him for the first time. And maybe I was. Leo, surprisingly, was the next to speak up. About the reality check app, he started, looking genuinely ashamed. That was my own twisted way of trying to light a fire under you. I thought if I made you angry enough, if you felt like you had to prove us all wrong. He shrugged. It worked, didn't it? But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. We were at your book launch, Aunt Carol said calmly. I stared at her, my mouth hanging open. All of us. We wore ridiculous disguises because we didn't want to ruin your moment if you didn't want us there. Flashes of that night flooded my memory. I'd been so overwhelmed I had barely registered the faces in the crowd. Why didn't you say anything? My mother reached for my hand across the table. Because that night was yours, Ryan. Only yours. Say. And suddenly, sitting there in the most pretentious restaurant in New York City, surrounded by fine china and expensive crystal, I felt like a complete and utter idiot. A happy, confused, emotional, and still slightly angry idiot. But an idiot who had maybe gotten the entire story wrong. Or maybe we all had. Families are complicated, aren't they? So what's the verdict? Do you forgive people for trying to protect you the wrong way? Or do you hold a grudge because they didn't believe in you the right way? How are you supposed to execute your perfect revenge when your targets simply refuse to be the villains in your story? That's the kind of complex character dilemma they don't prepare you for in writing workshops. The rest of the dinner unfolded in an emotional territory for which I had no map. My meticulously planned revenge had somehow morphed into a reconciliation? What a cliché plot twist. Between courses with unpronounceable names and microscopic portions, seriously, when did molecular gastronomy become code for "you'll need a microscope to find your food"? I discovered my family's relationship with my dream was far more complex than I had ever allowed myself to believe. "I have all of your interviews saved on the DVR," my mother confessed, poking timidly at a dish that I think was some kind of deconstructed scallop foam. "That one on Good Morning Queens, when you choked on your water? I've probably watched it 15 times. It's good to know my most humiliating televised moment has become a source of family entertainment." Leo, it turned out, had a group chat with his college friends dedicated solely to sharing news about my book. "We even have a betting pool going for when the movie rights will sell," he admitted with a wry grin. "I've got money on 2025, so don't let me down." The most surreal moment came when my father, after his second glass of wine, which, technically, he shouldn't have been served after the first one was knocked over, but I think the waiter sensed we needed the social lubricant, asked me to sign his copy of the book. "Your copy?" I asked, confused. He then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a dog-eared, heavily worn copy of The Echo Lake, with colorful post-it notes sticking out from dozens of pages and entire passages underlined in pen. "I read it on the subway during my commute," he explained, looking almost sheepish. "I've been through it 3 times already." That completely disarmed me. My father, the man who believed literature was for people with too much time on their hands, hadn't just read my book, he had studied it like it was a sacred text. I took the pen he offered me, his special Parker pen, the one he never lets anyone even look at, and just stared at the blank title page, with absolutely no idea what to write. How do you dedicate a book to the man who spent years telling you that you were wasting your time, only to find out he was secretly your most devoted reader? I went with the simple truth. For my dad, who taught me that dreams and reality can share the same space, even if it took us a while to figure that out. With love, Ryan. Who could have guessed that my success would be contagious? Certainly not me. I had always cast myself as the lone dreamer in a sea of pragmatists. 3 months after the Revelation Dinner, as it was officially christened in the family group text, yes, I'm in it now, the entire dynamic of my family had shifted in ways I could never have anticipated. The resentment I had expected to navigate was gone, replaced by something far more valuable: understanding, and something even rarer in the universe of family relations: genuine, observable change. My mother, for instance, transformed the main hallway of their Queens home into a veritable shrine to my literary career. It's now covered in framed newspaper clippings, photos from book signings, and even the cocktail napkin on which I first scribbled the idea for my next novel. She literally snatched it from my hand during a family dinner, declaring, "This is going to be worth millions someday." She was also the one who took the call from Apex Plus about the adaptation rights, and, after discovering they were serious, actually negotiated a better deal for me. "I was in sales for 30 years, honey," she told me later. "You think I don't know when a buyer has more room in their budget?" Who was this woman, and what had she done with my mother? Then there was my dad. At 65 years old, he did something no one saw coming. He dusted off his old bass guitar from the basement, had it restored, and started playing again. And not just noodling around at home, he formed a band with some other retired guys from the neighborhood. They call themselves Last Chance, and they play 70s rock covers at nursing homes and local charity events. The first time I saw him on a makeshift stage at the county fair, wearing a pair of old Converse and a denim jacket, my father, I was struck by a simple truth. It's never too late to pick up a dream you were forced to put down. "What do you think about writing a song together?" he asked me after their set, trying to sound casual. "You're good with words. I'm okay with the notes." The most stunning transformation, however, belonged to my brother. Leo, the corporate shark, the king of spreadsheets and productivity apps, simply quit his job. The reality check algorithm was flawed, he explained one afternoon as we painted the walls of his new business venture, a bookstore cafe in Astoria. "I ran the numbers on what it costs to give up on something you love, and it turns out that's far more expensive than the risk of trying." Pages and Pores opened 3 months later, featuring a special section for local authors and an espresso machine that cost more than my first car. On opening day, as I watched the line of customers snake around the block, I felt that specific potent kind of pride that only comes from seeing someone you love find their own story. And in perhaps the most improbable twist of all, Aunt Carol actually published her cookbook. With my help? Not exactly. She used my name to get a meeting with my publisher, then completely charmed them with her collection of recipes titled Apocalypse Appetizers. delicious dishes for the end of the days. It's all based on things you can make with canned goods and non-perishables. Apparently, there's a huge market for that. I've always had nightmares about the world ending, she explained cheerfully at her book launch. Now, at least I'm monetizing my anxiety. The book is, unexpectedly, a massive hit with college students and doomsday preppers. Go figure. The strangest thing about success is how it changes not just your life, but your entire perspective, especially when you realize the story you've been dying to tell is no longer the story that needs to be told. With the whirlwind of changes happening in my family, I had almost forgotten about my secret project. The scathing, tell-all novel I had planned to write, exposing every petty cruelty and quiet humiliation I'd ever endured. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, with a view of the East River, thank you, the Echo Lake, opened my laptop, and reread the first 50 pages. Technically speaking, it was good. The prose was sharp, the characters were clearly defined, the dialogue was cutting. But something felt wrong. The protagonist, a thinly veiled version of myself, was one-dimensional in his bitterness. The antagonist family was a caricature of cruelty. There were no nuances, no contradictions, none of the messy gray areas that make people and their relationships real. I closed the file and opened a new, blank document. I typed a title at the top, Invisible Words. And then, I started writing something completely different. My new manuscript wasn't about revenge, it was about forgiveness. It was about the tiny misunderstandings that accumulate over the years until they build walls between people who love each other. It was about how we try to protect the people we care about in all the wrong ways, and how we try to protect ourselves by building fortresses out of our resentment. It was about how difficult it is to truly see another person, and to allow yourself to be seen. I worked on it obsessively for months, writing not with anger, but with a kind of compassionate clarity I had never felt before. Chloe was the first to read it, of course. "It's the best thing you've ever written," she said simply, handing the manuscript back to me with tears in her eyes. Tucked into the second-to-last chapter was something just for her, a marriage proposal, woven so seamlessly into the narrative that only she would understand it. In the final pages, the protagonist finally realizes that being truly seen and loved by one person, with all your flaws and all your potential, is a far greater miracle than any bestseller list or movie deal. Was it a cliché? Probably. Was it true? Absolutely. While I nervously waited for her to reach that specific part, I arranged a small dinner to read excerpts of the new book to my family. We all squeezed into my parents' living room, the very same room where, years ago, they had all laughed at my useless hobby. "This book," I explained, my voice shaking slightly, "is for you. It's about us." I began to read, watching their faces shift through waves of recognition, discomfort, occasional laughter, and a few not-so-subtle tears. I was in the middle of a particularly emotional paragraph when my phone buzzed loudly on the table. I would normally ignore it, but the name on the screen made my heart leap. Eleanor Vance, Atlantic Crown. I answered, the curious eyes of my entire family fixed on me. "Ryan," Eleanor's excited voice came through the speaker. "We just closed the deal. The Echo Lake is officially being made into a movie. The contracts were signed today." A moment of stunned silence hung in the air, followed by an absolute eruption of cheers and hugs. Leo immediately checked his phone. "Yes! I knew it! Told you guys it would be 2025. Pay up!" For the first time in his entire life, my father popped a bottle of champagne on a regular Friday night. No holiday required. My mother was already on the phone, broadcasting the news to what sounded like our entire extended network of family and friends. When the chaos finally subsided, I turned back to my open laptop, ready to continue reading. But my mother gently closed the screen. "Ryan," she said, with that inexplicable intuition that all mothers seem to possess, "sometimes, honey, letting yourself be seen is a much bigger victory than proving everyone wrong." I looked at her, stunned to hear the very sentiment I had just written, echoed back to me. She smiled, one of those smiles that says, "I know you better than you know yourself." And I realized that maybe, just maybe, she had seen me all along. She just didn't have the words to show it. Sometimes, the most important words are the ones that remain invisible for far too long. They say you should write what you know, but maybe the real truth is, you can only truly write what you finally take the time to understand, even if it's been right in front of you your whole life. 5 years have passed since the Revelation dinner. I'm sitting on the porch of the beach house we bought in Montauk, nothing too extravagant, but it has enough room for the whole family, who now gather here for Sunday dinners with an almost religious devotion. I'm putting the finishing touches on my third novel, watching Chloe, now my wife, build a sandcastle with our 3-year-old daughter, Sophia. "Daddy, look what I wrote!" Sophia comes running up to me, holding a piece of construction paper covered in colorful crayon scribbles. I study it with the utmost seriousness. "This is an absolute masterpiece. Better than my last book, for sure." She giggles, a sound that completely melts my heart. "Can I be a writer like you when I grow up?" she asks, her enormous eyes seeming to take in the entire world. "You can be absolutely anything you want in this world, sweetie, and we will be cheering for you no matter what." I say the words with a conviction born from a place of deep, hard-won understanding. The film adaptation of The Echo Lake was a runaway success, exceeding even the most optimistic projections from Apex Plus. My dad co-wrote a piece for the official soundtrack, a collaboration that started as a joke over dinner and ended with a Grammy nomination. We didn't win, but the family trip to Los Angeles for the ceremony was unforgettable. My brother Leo's Bookstore Cafe has become a beloved local institution, now with 5 locations across the tri-state area, each one hosting community literary events. My mother now manages my speaking schedule and public appearances with an efficiency that would make a Fortune 500 CEO weep with envy. Aunt Carol is on the 6th installment of her Apocalypse Appetizers series, and recently signed a deal for a reality TV cooking show. And Grandma Betty, at 92, finally decided that, if my grandson and my niece can do it, so can I, and is currently writing her memoirs. Judging by the stories she's been letting slip at Sunday dinners after 2 glasses of Chardonnay, they promise to be absolutely scandalous. Yesterday, while I was sorting through some old boxes we'd brought over from my parents' house, I found something that took my breath away. My old, tattered notebook. The one my mother had thrown out all those years ago. The pages were yellowed at the edges, but it was perfectly intact. As I opened it, a small, folded note fell out. It read, "I never threw it away. I just saved it for when you were finally ready to see how much I believed in you all along. With all my love, Mom." She had rescued it from the trash that very same day, and had kept it safe for all those years. My new bestseller hits bookstores next month. On the dedication page, I wrote something that took me a lifetime to understand. For my family, who taught me that sometimes we have to feel invisible to truly learn how to be seen. And for Sophia, our daughter, who will never have to feel invisible to be cherished. Because maybe true success isn't about proving everyone wrong about you. It's about creating a world where no one has to prove their worth to be loved. And that, I've learned, is a story worth writing.